Hello, everybody. Valentin Todorov from Alir with another session on the PeopleSoft Test Framework. Today, we're going to look at the data loader. Data loader is a feature I helped build out back when I was at Oracle, which allows you to source data from the target testing environment so that you can use it in your test. As we know in a PTF test, a lot of the data could be just static, but these values, as you iterate and go from version to version in the life cycle of PeopleSoft, will change over time. Be it chart field values, vendor, category items, users, lots of things change. And we want to source these automatically, effectively making these tests more and more automated and self-contained and self-healing in effect. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the data loader first, and then we're going to source vendors directly from a query that's in the target test environment. But before we do that, let's set up the data loader. There's some preliminary steps you have to do to set up data loader before you use it within a PTF test. So to do this, there's two things you need to do. The first is within the runtime options for the target environment. So right now I'm just targeting the local environment that's on my machine. For that specific profile called Pi50, you'll also have a data loader tab in here. Okay, and this data loader tab has to be configured so that you can source data from that environment. Okay. I know that my host is localhost local domain, or you can use the IP address of it as well. Let's actually use the localhost local domain. So of course this is something I've configured within my host file. So I'm just going to grab it, put it in here. The SSL port is going to be 8443, which is the same as what I used to authenticate into this client. And my local node is going to be PeopleSoft EP. Okay, so that's one requirement. Another requirement to using the data loader is that you have to have a user right here on the options tab. Okay, this user has to have the query level security and a specific role that I'm going to check and make sure that they do have. Okay, so that it could work. So it's obviously here you can probably surmise it's VP1 because that's the out of the box one, and you click accept. The way to check if this thing is working okay is just invoke the data loader command. So we're going to insert a new line. We're going to go data loader, load, and then in the recognition, you want to kind of click it twice so the little pop-up window happens. And I'll click on the pop-up, and if I get a little warning message, error message like this one, it means something wasn't set up correctly. Okay, so something is off. So let's go ahead and check and make sure that that user does have that role. Okay, so in the environment that we just pointed to, which is this localhost local domain, let's go to that user security and make sure that they have a role called QAS admin. Okay, and if you go through the people book online help to the section for data loader within the PTF people book, this will also spell it out. So in people tools, security, user profiles, user profile. Obviously, I'm going to open up the VP1, but of course you want to do it to the batch user that you have set up on those execution options. Within PTF, we want to go to roles, and I'm not going to look QAS admin. There it is. Let's see if it was in there after all these warning messages. Okay, it wasn't in there. So now let's try it again. So we'll click on the button again, and this time it worked. So you got to have that QAS admin on the user that's defined in the runtime options. Okay, so that the data loader can connect. Okay, and this actually makes it a Swiss Army knife. You can actually source data from different environments too, which is really cool. So even though I'm pointing to this localhost local domain 8000 as my testing environment, I could have pointed this to another environment to grab data and push against this one. So you can kind of mix and match where you're targeting. Usually it's the same one, right? You want to get the data for that environment because it's specific to that environment you want to test with it. But there are instances where you want to grab data from one environment, test it against another environment. So the way that this is set up gives you that flexibility, which is very nice. Okay. All right. So data loader load. What we're going to do is we have to set up a few things. And there's a two-step wizard that's behind this button right here. Okay. The first thing you want to do is we want to give it a, something's a little wrong with my fonts here. It looks like it's over it. We want to give it a data loader name because you could have multiple data loaders within a script sourcing data from different queries. You got to give it some kind of name. So I'm going to call it source 2, for example. I did type in source too. And then you want to say what the query is. Well, what's the query name? Vendor. Okay. Obviously, you can create your own queries as well. You can just create public queries, and they'll show up on the list. This is one of the delivered queries that comes out of the box from the POM image. And I'm going to load it. And what loading does is, okay, from this query, what are the fields on that query? Well, these are the fields. I've got vendor ID, vendor short name, vendor status, business unit. And actually, I can grab that. Vendor ID and business unit can be grabbed out of it. Okay. When you press OK, it takes you to the second stage of this little wizard. Okay. In the second stage of the wizard, and you can always go back to stage one, click on the vendor and press edit query, and it brings you back to this one, right? Okay. So you can want to select, maybe you missed one of the fields that you want to select, press OK, and it takes you to step two. And step two helps you to declare the variables. Okay. So I've got a row count that I could declare, and you can manually declare row count. If you especially want to do a loop with iterations, you want to know when to stop those iterations. So you want to know how many data entries are in that query. If there's 7,000 vendors, you want to stop at 7,000. We don't want to go to infinity, right? So you want to pivot off the row count as the end of the loop. It's already pre-built these two variables, and of course the variables, just like in the people code, I start with the ampersand. And we're going to use just a vendor ID. We could use the business unit, but for simplicity purposes of the video, we're just going to use vendor ID as the variable. So we're going to click OK. We didn't change anything of these, but you can name a vendor ID and something more specific to you if you wanted to declare that variable name. We're going to press OK, and it's going to formulate the source to, which is the name, and all these parameters in here, so you don't have to do it manually. If you wanted to do it manually, you could have typed them in, but it's much easier to use the wizard. It's a little more fruitful. So now, because what we know the vendor, we can just place the variable in there. Instead of that 0004, which is a static value, now it's going to do a query. It's going to return values from that query, a single value. In this instance, it's going to pass it to this variable vendor ID, and it's going to use the variable live from the system, right? Obviously, be cautious of how you've built that query because they might have inactive. So most of the time, you don't want to use a delivered query. You want to create your own, put a couple of criteria in there so that it's only the active for specific testing criteria that you're looking for, right? We'll save our test, we'll run it, and we'll see how this works, okay? And we could change the other values as well if you wanted to, okay? Maybe like this ID. We'll press play, and you'll see in the log, and actually on this little yellow window, I'm not talking about this little yellow window at the top, but this helps you to see the step that it's on. So you see right there, data loader loading, it returned 432 rows, and then initializes the test. So we're sourcing the data as part of the data loader. It returned a bunch of string of array of data, and now it's going to use, and in this instance, because we're not looping it, it's going to use the first value on there that's returned and place it in the field. So let's see you do that. Okay, we're running the test again that we've pre-built in previous sessions. We're going to add a new run control, some dates in here, business unit, and there's a brand new supplier. The IND 0003 was sourced from that query. It's not that 004 that was previously on the test. Okay, and there's our pass. Our test was successful, and here at the top you'll see the data loader was initialized. We're in the log tab, and it returned 432 rows, values within an array. Okay, we only use the first one, which is this IND 0003, but it's very easy to use all of them. So for those 483, what we can do is we can actually set up a loop. So we can insert a loop very simply, just do a loop for ampersand IDX equals 0 to ampersand row count. Okay, and what I'm saying is from a variable of 0 to row count, because row count is my variable that I grabbed from the data loader, go ahead and loop this over, and each time pass in the vendor ID. And at the end, I want you to do a loop next, right? Because we're iterating. And you can pivot off that, and each time this thing loops, let's create a new run control. So I'm also going to do a concatenate for this name test underscore. I'm going to pipe it, and then I'm going to use the ampersand INX. Another thing we can do in our test, now that we've set up the data loader, We've done the for loop. Again, for loop, the index is equal to 1 to the row count, and the row count is the variable we declared in the step above it. And of course, we're passing it to create our run control names and to pass the vendor ID. And again, you can see the vendor ID is the same variable declaration that we did in the data loader. It's the exact same variable name. Got to make sure we're doing a loop next at the end as well. One thing that can add some more efficiency is the loop right now is going to start and log in each time with the same user. That's going to have you log in each and every time. So we can actually cut this entire start and log in piece and put it outside of the loop. So we can go ahead and select, and you can select the sequence from 1 till 7, cut that out, and let's put it above here. So again, it pastes below what you select. So now we're sourcing the data, we're starting and logging in, and then submitting, and then we're going to start the loop in here. And each time it loops through, it's going to go to the run control page. It's going to put in a new run control ID and create a run control with this each vendor, right? You can also see that I've unchecked the running of it. You can of course check it, but for time purposes, we don't want to wait for it to run the process each and every time. We just want to create the run controls. But if in a real test situation, of course, you would activate this as well. Okay. So let's go ahead and save this, play our test. There you go. You got to make sure it saves first. And the save is great because it makes sure that you've committed this to the database. If something were to go wrong and it crashes, you don't lose your data. It's all committed, and PTF does store all the tests and logs in the database. So that's where they are for safekeeping. Okay. All right. So it's done the sign-in portion. Now we're within the loop, and each time this thing is going to cycle, you can see that it created the run control name with PTF test underscore 1, those information, and the first value of supplier IND 0003. It's going to get back into the page, adds another value. This one should be test 2, right? Because it's pivoting off the iterating value of INDX. We're concatenating and creating the name for that. And you can see the supplier now is 004. Because that's just the suppliers that are on that vendor query. Okay. Next time around, 003. All right. All the way to 423, which we will not do in this recording. Right. We'll just do a couple of these so you can see 005. And I'm not creating the 005. These are the actual supplier IDs that are in the actual table sourced via the query, transferred through the data loader into this test. Okay, and this will just keep going. This is the real power of PTF. You can not only source the data from the environment, all built, with tools that are specific to PeopleSoft, but you can loop through a component X amount of times. That means you can test any component thousands of times for every single data combination if you chose to. Because right now we're just pivoting off the supplier ID, but you could also pivot off the business unit. So you create 430 for this business unit, another 430 for that business unit, another 430 for a different buyer. So you can kind of mix and match and source data so you can have thousands upon thousands of tests for any component, testing every permutation that could happen, making sure that, yes, we have tested literally everything that can ever happen within a component, and it's passed. So you know with certainty that there's no other combination that somebody could inject into here that goes beyond the page validation that could cause this component to fail. Okay. And there we go. Test 7, you can see the supplier ID is now 88 because that's the supplier ID, the vendor name ID that's off the query. And it's going to just keep going, again, 430 times. So we're going to go to 8 because it's a great number, and we're going to stop right here. So hopefully this gave you guys a good idea of the data loader, setting it up, using it within a test for a single value or for a loop within a component, so you can see the real power of PTF with data loader. So hopefully this video was useful for you. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for joining.